right, well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Trevor Johnson, and this is the Automated Communication Plans, Drip Marketing, and Text Messaging webinar. All right, so our agenda for today, we're going to cover in basics, what is drip marketing? We're going to talk about the types of automated communications that are possible through Slate, namely recurring delivery versus a drip marketing approach. We're also going to talk about how to set up a drip marketing campaign. And then we'll talk briefly near the end about your delivery method options, either email or text messaging. So in brief, what is drip marketing? Drip marketing is essentially a communication strategy that sends a series of pre-written messages over time, sequenced to deliver new information based on previous messages sent and related student actions throughout the cycle of the campaign. So essentially, let's say that you have some criteria that you want the students to meet. So for example, you want to start your Deliver campaign going to students who are juniors in high school, for example, if you're an undergraduate institution. And so you want them to get a message on the first day that they fall into your criteria for being in that population. So, if they're a junior in high school, that means they're going to have an entry term of fall 2017. So perhaps you have that field entry term and the prompt of fall 2017. As soon as that field gets set, you're going to want them to become a part of your junior campaign, and you're going to want them to get that message. So you would have a message that would go out to them on that day. Again, if this is a drip marketing campaign, you're going to want them to get a second message, perhaps 7 days after they became, a member of that population. They became a junior, a member of that junior campaign. They had that entry term set to be fall 2017. And again, you would have message 3 that would go out 14 days after they became a member of that campaign. And again, message 4. So this idea of sequence messages, these are different messages that are set up and delivered, different message content that are set to go out, over a period of time. The messages that you set up in Slate will be ongoing messages. They're set to go out every single day, but based on the query criteria that you set up, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail in a few minutes, the query criteria allows the messages to go out to the student in such a way that they receive the messages staggered in this 7-day way, or whatever the interval is that you want to set up. You can set it up in that way. All right, so contrasting a sort of sequenced message drip marketing campaign versus a recurring message campaign. A recurring message is really the same message being sent multiple times to the same student. So a good example of that would be a student who perhaps they've started an application to your institution, but they're still at an awaiting materials status. So they're still missing something. Perhaps your application deadline is a couple of weeks or months away, and you want to send the student a message to tell them that they're incomplete, and here is perhaps what items they're missing. So you could send them a message that says, "Hey, you're incomplete. Or you still haven't completed your application. This is what you're missing." And then you might want them to get that message again 7 days later if they are still incomplete. And again, 7 days later after that, if they are again still incomplete. So this idea of a recurring message is the same message that goes to the same student multiple times at an interval that you choose, as long as the student still meets the criteria for getting that message. And we'll talk about how to set that up in Slate as well. But again, contrasting the difference between a recurring message, which is the same message sent multiple times to the same student, versus sort of a true drip marketing campaign, which is different messages sent over time to the same student in sequence. Okay, so let's start with recurring, because it's a little bit easier to set up. Again, as I said, it only requires building one email in Slate, and then you can set it to be recurring. And again, a recurring message is going to be the same message sent to the same student multiple times, as long as they still meet the criteria for that query in Deliver. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Slate so we can actually take a look here at what that might look like. So we're going to go into our Deliver module, and we're going to go and check out the sample recurring mailing. So I've pre-built parts of this. Again, if you were to set this up for the first time, you would click New Mailing and start there. New mailing is also where you would choose whether you wanted to send an email or a text message. We'll circle back to that. But let's go ahead and start here with my sample message that I've built. So first things first, let's look at our recipients list. So the sample query that I've built here is looking at students who are still at an awaiting materials status. So we're going to use a status of a filter of application status, and the status being still in awaiting materials. It's important to keep in mind when you're building something like a recurring message, the presumption is that the student will, after a certain point, no longer fit the criteria for that mailing. So you wouldn't want to create a recurring mailing that's going to students who have a status that will never change. So a student type of freshman or a student type of transfer, unless you really wanted to truly sort of spam them with the same message over a period of days, but that wouldn't really make much sense in most contexts. So the idea here being, hey, we want to send students this message as long as they are still at an awaiting materials status. When they go complete, when all their items are received, they'll move on to awaiting decision or awaiting confirmation or decided, and they'll no longer meet the criteria for this query, so they'll stop getting our awaiting materials message. So this is the filter we want to use. You may want to use additional filters as well in your case, but this would be the basic filter that would give us our population that we're looking for here. And then as far as our exports go, again, within a query and deliver, your exports are your merge field, so we want to be sure that we have the student's name as well as their email address. And then we're also going to have this query export for missing admissions checklist items line break. So this is going to allow us to actually merge in what items are missing for that student within their email. So it's a little bit more personalized. All right, so now that we have our query set up for our mailing, let's go back to our message and take a look at the actual message content. So I've got my recipient in here, my email field, my subject, your application to Slate University is still incomplete. We've got our message here, dear first name, your application is still incomplete. You're missing the following items. Let's go ahead and put in that merge field for that missing checklist items. So this is going to give us the items that our student is missing. And we'll go ahead and click save. All right, so here's our sample message, and we've got some the items that the student is missing. They're missing a whole mess of items here. They are just a test applicant, so they have a lot of random stuff on their checklist. All right, so up until this point, this just looks like a regular old deliver mailing. Nothing different about this yet. The idea of making this message recurring comes when we start to click the send message button. So when we first click send message, we're going to be presented with this option here of how do we want to send our message. So the crux here is we want this to be an ongoing mailing. If we were to just send it one time and then have it stop, it would only send once to everyone and say, hey, your application is incomplete, but we want them to keep on getting it as long as they still meet the criteria for our query. So we're going to choose ongoing. Again, we don't need to choose a stop date and time, but we could. As far as our delivery, we're going to want this to go out Monday through Friday. You could also have it go out every day of the week. It really is sort of up to you and what you want to happen. Maybe you want it to only go one day of a week and it will go to everyone during that day. But again, this is up to you and your process. And you can choose which delivery window you want to be chosen as well. So we'll have our message go out in the afternoon. And then here it is. This is the crux of this process, recurring delivery. If we choose this, we have the option of delivering this message to the same recipient multiple times. Now, we have a handy little warning in here because we don't want you to accidentally use this feature. It is possible to truly spam your students using this feature, especially if you were to send something once every single day. That would not be very fun and you would get a lot of opt-outs. So in our example from our PowerPoint, we had a 7-day interval. So we can choose every 7 days. So again, what this setup will do is it will send this message to everybody who fits the criteria for our query. In our case, it was just the one student, Alexander Hamilton. But it will send it to everyone who meets the query criteria the first time we send the message when we click send. And then 7 days from now, when the message sends again, it will evaluate the query, and rather than saving the results history and excluding people who have already been sent the message, Slate will essentially delete that query run and send the message again to anyone who meets the criteria for that query at that time in 7 days. So the interval that you can choose here is anywhere from 1 to 30 days. If you want to do an interval that's higher than 30 days, you can just build multiple messages to sort of achieve the same sort of functionality. All right, so we'll go ahead and click Save on that setting there. We did have a quick question that came in, and I'll go ahead and answer it now, I should say. Feel free to ask questions during the webinar, though we'll also have time for questions at the end, so if it would be helpful to wait till the end for you, that's great. But a question that did come in, is the missing checklist line break export available in the STL? Yes, that export should be available in the Slate template library, so you can go ahead and add that to your instance of Slate or leverage it from the STL in the query tool, and you can export the checklist missing in a line break sort of way, as well as a comma delimited way as well. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back to our PowerPoint here. All right, so we just talked about recurring message. That looks good. So now we're going to move on to drip marketing a little bit. So again, drip marketing, as I mentioned before, is this idea of sending a sequence of messages, different messages over time to a student based on certain criteria that they meet. So a really cool and interesting and somewhat novel way to do this in Slate is to use populations. Populations are I would say relatively new feature in Slate. They've been around for at least a year, and you may have heard about populations if you saw Eliza's Security and Permissions webinar in December. Up until this point, populations have been used predominantly for, again, security and permission related tasks. But essentially what a population is, we have a populations table in Slate. You can assign a student to be a member of a particular population. Students can be a member of multiple populations. And populations work a lot like checklist groups. So if a student fits the criteria to be in a population, they can be set to be in that population via a rule. And if they no longer fit the criteria for that population rule, then they are going to be removed from the population. They no longer have that population on their record. So populations are really designed to give you the power to build some more of the complicated criteria around who fits into a population within the rule that sets that population, and then you can leverage the fact that the student is in that population in a lot of different ways. Queries, obviously, to then drive your deliver campaigns. And so what this really does is it takes that again, the more complicated filter criteria for who should be in this population, puts that into the rule, and then your deliver campaign can just reference the fact that the student is in that population or that they have been in that population for a number of days in order to get their specific message. So let's go see this in action. Let's actually go into Slate and take a look at what this looks like. Get out of our PowerPoint again, and we will go from there. All right, so jumping back to the home screen of Slate, we can go over to our database tool. And in the automations area of Slate, you'll see that we have this populations link. You can click on that. I already created a sample population for our conversation today, this junior campaign population. So again, if we are sort of thinking about that idea of a student who's a junior in high school, has a fall 2017 entry term, perhaps that's what the criteria will be for them to be a junior in our instance here of Slate. But really, when you're creating populations, all you have to do is give them a name. So giving your population a name, creating that population, doesn't cause anybody to fall into that population. You need to build a rule. Excuse me. You need to build a rule in order for them to, join that population. So you can easily come in here and start testing, build out a population or two to get started. So we've created this already, so we'll just hit cancel here. So now that we've created a population, we're going to want to go and assign that population to some of our student records in Slate. So we'll jump over to the rules editor, and we'll go ahead and choose new rule. So this is going to be our sample population rule. All right, so the population for this rule, not to be confused with the population we're about to choose, but this is a population in the sense of query base or query type. We're choosing, what type of, rule or type of population for our rule here are we building, and this should look familiar to most folks. So in our situation, we want to choose a prospects-based rule. And then the type of the rule is going to be person population. So this is how you build a rule that can set a student to be a member of a particular population. Now, like a lot of things in Slate, populations can be both person-scoped and application-scoped. So if you wanted to build some application scope populations, you could create those rules by choosing a rule here for applications, and then the type would be application population. But for our example today, we're choosing a prospects-based rule, and the type, again, person population, since someone who is a junior in high school is a junior in high school before they even apply to your institution, and so we're going to want to set this population based on person scope data. For our folder, we'll just go ahead and throw this into our test folder. I'll set the status to be preview. A note about exclusivity groups. You can create population rules within an exclusivity group if you want. So much like staff assignment or any other type of rule that group of rules that might use an exclusivity group, you can build your populations in such a way that a student should get one population first, and then if that rule is within an exclusivity group, they will not be evaluated for the subsequent population rules. Again, since a student could have multiple populations, an exclusivity group is by no means required when you're building your rules. Just depending on your specific process, how many population groups you set up, exclusivity groups may come in handy for simplicity when you're building your rules. But in our situation, we're just building one rule, so we don't need an exclusivity group today. All right, so we'll go ahead and click Save. Okay, so as I had mentioned before with our filter for entry term, we want to take a look at students who have a fall 2017 entry term. So those would be students who are going to be rising juniors in high school, so we want them to be a member of our junior campaign. So we'll go ahead and set that as our filter. All right, and then for our population, again, we're going to set our population here with this rule, so we're setting the junior campaign population. There was a quick question that just came in. What if we want to capture students regardless of if they're an applicant or a prospect? If you want to capture students regardless of whether they're an applicant or a prospect, then you'd want to use a person population rule, because the prospects-based query includes all people in your database. So that includes people who are prospects, inquiries, and applicants, regardless of application status. So that would be the way that you would do that. All right, so let's go ahead and save our rule here. All right, so to sort of speed things up in Movie Magic, I already had a rule ahead of time, and we set our population for Alexander Hamilton previously, just so that we could see things happen a little bit faster here. We gave him an entry term of 2017 fall already, and the rule that I built this morning before our call to set his entry term, it looks exactly the same as the rule we just built, went ahead and set his population to be in the junior campaign. So the population that a student is a part of does appear now on the student's dashboard. This is a relatively recent development, which is very exciting. But we include the date that the population was set, as well as the name of the population. So Alexander Hamilton here is a part of the junior campaign population. That population, he became a member of that population on February 24th, 2016. And this idea of when the population is set is obviously very important for our drip marketing campaigns, because we're going to be referencing the date that the population was set, or the record became a member of that population in our campaigns. All right, so now that we have a campaign, our junior campaign population has been set, let's go ahead and build an email to send to him. All right, so I'm going to go and choose new mailing. And I am going to go ahead and say this is my junior campaign email 1. And we're going to go ahead and put that in my junior campaign folder. And I'm going to go ahead and click Save. All right, so let's go ahead and build this recipients list. So we'll choose new query. We will say that this is our junior campaign email 1. And again, this is going to be a prospects-based population for our query. Click Save. Get rid of our default filter there. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a filter. Now we have a couple choices here. We're going to look at the filters in the Slate template library, and we're going to type in population. So you can see that we have a few. Population as a filter is available, and what this allows you to do is to choose, to see, is this student in this population? Who is in this population at all? And so this is really a very simple and straightforward way to see who's in my population. And that's a great thing to have for many types of queries, not specifically the one we're going to want to use for drip marketing, because it doesn't allow us to get a little bit more detailed and nuanced to see, when did they come into that population. So we're going to hit cancel on that one. Instead, we're going to choose either population timestamp or population timestamp days. So let's start with population timestamp days and sort of show you what that looks like. So population timestamp days is essentially, it allows you to choose a sort of an interval, so to speak. So what we do is we choose the population that we want here, and then we choose the number of days since that student was in that population. So this would allow us to build, again, if we wanted to say, if we said 0, for example, our result is actually going to be 1. 0 is going to return everybody who had joined the junior campaign population today. Alexander Hamilton joined that population today, February 24th. So he is the result here that's being returned. So this would be the appropriate filter to use for your first message that you were sending in a drip marketing campaign. If you also set up your populations on that day and did a retroactive refresh so that everybody that you wanted to be in that population had that population set, on that day. And then you set your message to go and send on that day as well. That's expecting a lot to happen in one day, especially since we encourage you to test here when you're using Slate as much as possible so that you are familiar with the results that are going to occur. So maybe 0 is not the best option to use for our first message. Maybe what we want to do is actually do a bit of a catch-up mailing. And say you've been testing populations for a little while, you've been setting them up in your instance, you've got your rule running, it's been setting your junior campaign population based on an entry term for a number of days. So you have people who have joined that population over time, and you want to be able to specify a date range. So that's where the population timestamp filter comes in. And it does allow you to choose a filter, choose a population, junior campaign, and specify a start date and an end date. So, I can safely say that nobody joined our junior campaign since January 1st, 2016, and our end date could be today, for example. In this situation, let's go ahead and use English. Oh, we didn't give anybody that one either. So we're going to go ahead and do that. There we go. So in this situation, you're going to want to use today plus 1 to pull in people who have had the population set sort of through today. That will ensure that happens. If you do today, they'll just get the message tomorrow if you've got your ongoing mailing set up to go out every day. But this essentially allows you to sort of do a catch-up. So you basically say, okay, everybody who's had their population set today and in the past would fit the criteria for my mailing, and they will get that mailing in the future. So let's go ahead and save that. And actually, I'm going to do this so that we get our guy. There he is. Okay. All right. So let's jump back to the email campaign. Go ahead and edit our message. Put in our recipient email. This is the first message in the junior campaign. And we could say something like, dear first name, congratulations, junior year is the most important year. Looking forward to getting your application, though we don't want to burden them too much, but this is just for fun. There we go. P.S. We hope you enjoyed National Dog Biscuit Appreciation Day yesterday. So if any of you were on yesterday's webinar, we learned that yesterday was National Dog Biscuit Appreciation Day. This really only applies if we're sending your mailing today, so we don't need to leave that in there. But for those of you that were on the webinar yesterday, that was a fun little email we had. All right, we'll go ahead and hit save. So here we are. So dear Alexander, congratulations, juniors, your most important year. Looking forward to getting your application from admissions. And this can be our first message here in our campaign. So again, the settings that we're going to want to set up here when we click send, we're going to want to make sure that we choose continue running this mailing indefinitely. And really importantly, we're going to want to choose, in this situation, every day of the week is always a good idea, though because we chose the timestamp with a start and an end date, and if you have today as the end date, the mailing is always going to pick up people who haven't gotten it yet whenever it's queues up to send. So you could have it set up to just go out on Monday or Tuesday or whatever days of the week that you wanted that message to go out, and you can have it set up to go out at a certain time. And then again, we definitely wouldn't want recurring delivery in this situation because we only want our students to get the first message in the series once. All right, so let's just click save there. All right. So let's go take a look at what our second email would look like. So again, to fast forward and save a little time here, I pre-built our second and third messages so that we don't have to watch me build all the different parts of these as part of that. The difference with message 2 is going to be the query filter that you use. So as I mentioned before, looking at the filters, take a look at our query here really fast. Here we're using the population timestamp days filter. So this allows us to specify that interval. And this is going to return people who had the junior campaign population, who joined the junior campaign population 7 days ago. So in this situation, this is how this message would be configured in order to, each day that the message sends, it's going to evaluate this query and see, okay, who joined the junior campaign population 7 days ago, and it's going to send the message to them. So if you do set up your filters like this, you're going to want to make sure that when you do go to send that mailing, that you have every single day of the week selected. Because if you're on sort of a rolling 7-day time frame, obviously a student could submit it depending on your criteria that you've set up for your population. Slate's running 24 hours a day. So if a student submits an inquiry form, for example, their record is created on a Saturday, their entry term is set on that Saturday, their population gets set on that Saturday. 7 days after that is going to be a Saturday, and so you're going to want to make sure that they get that message. You don't want to skip any days, otherwise you'll start skipping portions of your population. And this is how we would send our second message. And likewise, with our third message, we would go ahead and take a look at our query again. The only difference in the query for the third message in our drip marketing campaign is going to be that interval. So instead of having 7 days after they became a member of that population, we're going to choose 14 days. And then our Alexander Hamilton student, he would get his first message today, he'd get his next message 7 days from now, his next message 14 days from now, and on into the future. So you can really create as many messages here in this way as you want, and really what we've done here is sort of decoupled, by using the population functionality, you've really decoupled some of the more complicated filter criteria that you might have around who you want to get your messages, put that in the rule, which can be accessed, updated, even to do some troubleshooting on it, without having to sort of touch your mailings. So since these mailings are going to be ongoing mailings, they're referencing the population. If you decide that you want to change the criteria for who should be in your population, you can do that on the rule, and it will change the population, bring in the new people, if you do a retroactive refresh, that sort of a thing. And you won't have to touch any of your messages. So if you decide you've changed the criteria, who is a junior, who should be in the junior campaign, or maybe you want to go and make it a little bit more specific, junior athletic campaign, people who've indicated an interest in athletics, all you need to do is change the rule criteria that sets that junior campaign population, and then every mailing that references that population is okay. It can just stay the way that they are, and you don't need to make that change in every single mailing that you have, because you're just changing it at the population rule level. All right, so let's circle back to some of the questions that have been asked. One of the questions was, will applicant populations show on the dashboard? The answer is yes, for person-scoped populations. Person-scoped populations will show on the dashboard tab, as they are showing right here for my test applicant. Application-scoped populations do not show on the application dashboard at this time, though you could certainly submit a new feature request for that. We also have population exports available in the Slate Template library. So if you wanted to, you could set a population export and add that to sort of a custom application-scoped dashboard query. So if you're familiar with creating a dashboard query to display custom data points on the application dashboard, like for example, application major right here has been customized to display here based on an application scope dashboard query. So it's certainly possible to display populations in that way on the application tab. And if you need help with that, or want some more detailed instructions for how to set that up, you can certainly reference our documentation, or submit a request to the student record group in the service desk, and we'd be happy to help you out there. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back to our PowerPoint and see what we have left there. So the last slide in my PowerPoint is really just sort of about text messaging, using email or text message, and what are some best practices around that. We'll just jump back into Slate for this, since this is a pretty, you've got this idea of what that slide means. If you're creating a new mailing, we can go ahead and just do a sort of sample text message mailing. Put that in our test folder, and we're going to choose a method of SMS. So this should be a review for many of you if you're familiar with how to set up a text message in Slate. Actually, maybe we should just go ahead and change one of our existing emails to be text message related. Oh, we can't change it. Once you've built a mailing, you cannot change it to be a text message. You have to set it to be text message from the beginning. So I'll go back to what I was doing before. The difference between a text message and an email is obvious. One is an email, one is a text message. And so we really do recommend, being wise about what you choose, how you choose to sort of communicate with your applicants, being respectful of the fact that text messaging is obviously a little bit more, much more in their face. They may be getting emails and text messages obviously on their smartphone in the same place, but a text message, really pings you immediately versus an email, which you go and check. So, using text messaging wisely is always a good idea. There will be different schools of thought on this, and different schools do things a little bit differently. We certainly, see a lot of schools using text messaging in ways around events. So sort of that idea of a last minute update about an event, or hey, you're registered for this visit tomorrow, here's a link to our website with some directions to campus in case you were wondering about that, or we've got you scheduled, that kind of a thing. You can still use merge fields in a text message, so you can personalize it to say Dear Alexander, dear first name, that kind of a thing, but obviously you are limited in the number of characters in a text message to 160. So maybe something like here are the items that you're missing from your application might be a little bit too much for a text message, but you could certainly say something along the lines of you are still missing items in your application. Go to your status page to check on those. And again, messages do cost 1 cent per message sent or received. So if the student texts you back, it costs 1 credit as well, and those credits cost 1 cent to purchase from us. It's not something that we make any money off of, but it is the cost of sending the text messages and receiving the text messages. You can set up text messaging by going to your SMS inbox here, and you'll have a link in your instance to go ahead and set up your message number and purchase credits if you need to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and take some more questions. If you have other questions, feel free to go ahead and ask them in the chat, and we will go ahead and take a look at those. So one question we have here is, many years ago, a previous email service provider told us that people are more likely to respond to messages that are sent Tuesday to Saturday, or rather Saturday to Tuesday. So we usually send out messages during that time frame. Do we have any data about which days of the week are most effective for sending messages? That's a great question. At the sort of at my fingertips right now, I don't have any data about that, but I can tell you that it will certainly vary by a lot of factors, vary by messages and other factors like student type, undergrad versus grad, different types of programs. So we have a lot of different types of schools, obviously using Slate. So sort of our aggregate numbers might not be sort of reflective of any best strategy for one particular school to pursue. That might be certainly something to inquire, post in the community forums about, see what other schools might have some suggestions around there. All right, so next question, if a day is not selected for delivery of the message, will those emails be skipped altogether, or will they be sent on the next available day? So that's a great question. It depends on the sort of the filters that you're set up, but in my example that we created, you are going to need to set up your mailing to go every single day. Let's go ahead and bring that message back up here. So in my message number 2 filter, all right. Okay, so our population timestamp days filter here is looking at students who joined the junior campaign, became a member of that population 7 days ago. So that is agnostic of weekdays, weekends, and so in order for the sort of logic of your messages to continue to function, because the value, a student could join the junior campaign population any day of the week. You're going to want to make sure that your message is being sent every day of the week in order to capture students, in their entirety. Because if you were to skip a day of the week for your delivery, for example, Saturday or Sunday or something like that, because we're looking at exactly 7 days in the past or 5 days or whatever you end up choosing, because students are going to get they're going to join a population every day of the week, you will start missing people at some point if your message is not set to go out every day of the week. So it is a good idea to send the message every day of the week if you're using this timestamp days filter like this. All right. Another question. Last year we were advised to use mailing sent status for the drip flow. Is that a possibility to use still? So that's a great question. Using populations for drip marketing is really the recommended best practice. There was some new functionality around populations really developed recently, rolled out recently, to make it a little bit more functional for drip marketing campaigns, along the lines of displaying the population on the student record, and these population interval and date stamp, timestamp filters available in the Slate Template library. So this would really be the best way to set up your drip marketing campaign moving forward. We're also looking at creating some functionality within the Deliver module to actually display, if you are using population filters for ongoing or scheduled messages, the ability to actually see what messages will be sent to a given population in the future. So we're not quite there with making something available yet, but it's something that we're actively working on, is sort of ability to see in a more comprehensive way, sort of a 40,000 foot level, the ability to see what messages are going to be sent to a given population up in the future, looking at both sort of the population as a whole, as well as possibly on a student by student basis, especially if they're a member of multiple populations, what messages are queued to send to those populations. If that student is a member of those populations, you'd be able to see, what messages they are planning to be sent to them based on messages that you've have set to be ongoing. So that's sort of some cool functionality that we're looking to release in the coming weeks and months. So that would definitely be one reason to use populations for drip marketing. There are other filters you can use in Slate to sort of approximate drip marketing, or depending on your process, things like the inquiry. Let's take a look at our query here. There's an inquiry status change date filter. That can be a great filter to use if you want to look at when a student became an inquiry or a prospect. I think we call it prospect. No, it's status change date. So yeah, looking at status change date. You can see when a student became a member, of a particular status, when they became a prospect, when they became an inquiry, number of days since that has happened, that kind of a thing. Mailing sent status is still a fine filter to use. Mailing sent status allows you to, let's take a look at the mailing sent status filters here. The thing about mailing sent filters is that they are pretty inefficient from a sort of a functional perspective. It really, it's a much slower, more inefficient filter because it really has to go out and look at the message and all this other stuff. And it can also be a little bit, less accurate. You can run into some issues, especially if if there's issues with sending your first message or other things like that, there can be some downstream problems. So the best thing about using a filter that looks at population is that's a solid data point that gets set on the student record at a particular date and time, and you're not going to sort of cause any issues to arise later on. One nice thing about the mailing sent status filter is that you can filter based on whether the message was delivered, opened, clicked, bounced, and subscribed. So theoretically, it's possible to build a message that says, if the student opened this message, I want to send them another message. It's certainly possible. There are some downsides to that in the sense that delivery status statistics are not they're not 100% accurate, and it has nothing to do with Slate. It has everything to do with email clients and their accuracy about communicating back to our servers whether the message was opened. So if a message shows is opened, it's pretty likely that it was actually opened, but you may have many messages that were marked as delivered that were actually opened, just because of the way a mail client might block some of those features that allow us to know whether the message was opened or not. That can come into play there. So you wouldn't want to sort of close off your communication stream too soon or too quickly just based on whether a student is opening messages. So if they're still an active applicant or active prospect in your database, continuing to send them those messages based on the population is a great way to go. But there's certainly nuanced possibilities using some of these other filters. Just know that it gets, the more nuanced and complicated it gets, the harder it is to sort of sustain it. So you want to make sure that you really sort of think through your full process and architect it in a way that's going to be sustainable for you and your colleagues moving forward. All right. Next question. So if you've been setting up your population rules over time so that some people entered the population more than a week ago, how do you make sure that recipients don't get messages 2 and 1 at the same time? That's a great question. So you'll just have to think about this sort of for your own specific instance. If you have people that are that have been if you have people that have fallen into that category, over the course of time, you'll want to do sort of a catch-up mailing, and you can look at your specific population. You can do exports to see their population when they came into that population. So you can certainly create messages that are appropriate based on when the dates started. That population started getting set. It's also possible to use this sort of population timestamp rather than using population timestamp days. You can use a filter like population timestamp and give yourself an interval. So if you want to be a little bit more specific with a catch-up mailing, you can always sort of set that start date and end date so that you're really building messages. So perhaps for your historical population, you want to handle things in one way and create a series of sort of one-time mailings for them, but then sort of moving forward, you can create ongoing messages that use the interval. So you just sort of have to handle it a little bit differently depending on your specific process. All right. So next question, how do you set up emails based on call to actions in emails? So such as a student clicking on a link to drive a different email to be sent. So it sort of depends on what you are wanting them to do. So for example, as I was just saying with the mailing sent status filter, you can reference whether they've clicked on a message. Or clicked on a link in a message, so you can certainly build additional messages that go out based on the fact that they clicked a message in the junior campaign message 3. I want to send them another message or have something else happen to that effect. So you can certainly do that if you want, although again, as I mentioned before, click, open, and deliver rates and things like that it's not a perfect data point just because of different email clients and how messages are opened by students. And so, you may be missing people who are clicking and are opening emails that you're not sending those additional messages to. So just keep that in mind as far as your mailings go. All right, so another question. Is it better to set up generic populations like junior, or would it be better to set up a population to be more specific, like fall 2017? If you keep it generic like junior and update it once a year, do you need to do a retroactive refresh to pull those who are now seniors out of the junior population? All right, so that's a great question. Sort of the best way to go for your purpose, you could go either way depending on what you want to do. The beauty of populations is that, again, like checklist groups, the student will fall out of the population when they no longer meet the criteria. So if you have sort of this idea, especially if you have sort of junior, say you have a junior campaign that goes throughout the spring of the student's junior year and it doesn't change year to year, you could certainly, if you're using those same messages year to year based on the same campaign or population value rather, no need to sort of make a new population every year. Students will fall in and out of that population as they become juniors. It is important to understand that when you make changes to your rules, the rule does not automatically fire on every student in your database. The population rules, like many other rules, fire on a deferred schedule. So let's go find our rule. So here's our assigned junior campaign population rule. Again, this rule fires on a deferred basis. So if I decided, you would need to make changes to this rule, every year. So once your junior campaign is no longer 2017 fall, now it's going to be 2018 fall, you are going to want to come in and make a change to that rule, click save. And again, that will take effect for new students moving forward who get that value set or whose records are updated, to do a retroactive refresh for all students in your database who might need that population sent. You sort of have two ways to go. One way is to do a retroactive refresh sort of en masse for all of your rules. A little bit more elegant way to go was recently released as a stocking stuffer, I think. I want to go to queries actually. So let's say we updated our junior campaign population rule to be 2018 fall now. we don't have 2018 fall, so let's pretend we want it to be 2016 fall. So we're going to change it to say, anybody who's 2016 fall, now you're in the junior campaign. So now we have the problem of, everybody who has 2016 fall as their entry term, we need this rule to fire on them so that they get updated to be in the appropriate population. So again, as I said, you could run a full retroactive refresh on all of your rules, or you could also come into the query tool and you could build a query where you look to people who have that value, entry term of fall 2016, for example. Get rid of that other filter. So essentially what we're doing here in our query is we're identifying a population of people who match the population that our rule is going to be based on. And we can go ahead and run this query. And one of our destinations now is actually retroactive refresh. So you may have seen this in the Slaves News in January. I think January was the issue that we mentioned that. It may have gone out in a tweet as well. But you can actually export to retroactive refresh. So what this allows you to do is essentially run a retroactive refresh that runs all of your rules on these particular records. So rather than a retroactive refresh within the rules editor, which runs all rules on all records that have been updated since the date that you chose, which is a little bit more of a blunt instrument, certainly appropriate in many cases. But in the situation of, if you know the population of people that you need to have the rules run on, you can certainly use this query method to sort of export to retroactive refresh and cause the rules to run on just that population. And then that would ensure that their population is updated appropriately, and then they'll fall into your mailing criteria. Okay. Another question, what are the benefits of using populations instead of using tags? It's a great question. So tags function a little bit more like fields in the sense that they can be set and unset manually. So if we go look at our test record here, I can click on test record and now that is clicked, and I can click on that and I can click it off. So it's there's a manual aspect to tags. Certainly you can have a rule that sets a tag, but you would also need a rule to unset the tag. So that's one major difference. Again, one rule to set a population of junior campaign. If the student no longer fits the criteria for that rule, they're going to fall out of that population. Whereas with tags, once the tag has been set, it will be set on that student, and it will not be unset unless you have a rule to unset it, or you manually unset it, or you take some other action to unset it, either via form submission or data import or query export. There's a lot of ways you could unset a tag, but there's not going to be any sort of automatic way to sort of pull them out of that tag. So, I could certainly see different schools using either for different approaches, but from a drip marketing perspective, where you really want people to get the message if they fit the criteria for the campaign, using populations is a really elegant way to do it. With tags, you run the risk of people remaining in that population once they no longer fit the criteria for that population. And again, manually clicking people on and off is not the best way to go either. So, so that's sort of the difference there. All right, another question. Are text messages tracked in the timeline? So the answer to that is for sent messages, they are tracked. So if you send a message to a student as a text message, it will show up in the interaction just like a message, an email message that was sent. At this time, replies from the student are not going to be in the interactions. They show up in the SMS inbox, though as we heard yesterday, with the advent of our sort of inbox tool within Slate, there are some changes coming to sort of how SMS messages are handled, and so I would anticipate certainly in the future that there'll be a little bit more transparency around the text message appearance. All right, so another question. How do you set up a drip campaign of 5 messages where message number 3 is specific to a tag, for example, women, veterans, industry, etc.? What happens if a candidate has 2 tags? So just like any mailing that you create, the criteria for your query can be really whatever you want. So our example was sort of the most basic. We had 3 messages, all of them looking at students who are in the junior campaign population, and sending those messages based on the fact that they had joined the junior campaign population today. The next message 7 days after they joined the population, and the next message 14 days after they joined the population. But you can certainly get more nuance than that and add additional filters. So you might say, oh, if message 3 is only appropriate to this certain subset of students or student records, you can add additional filters to that message. I'm here on my message number 2. So if I wanted message 2, to only go to test records who are also in the junior campaign population, then I would just add that as an additional filter to that query that's running that message. So you can definitely get more nuanced with that if you like. All right, another question. Are there plans to create a Deliver dashboard that schools can use to compare the performance of multiple emails in one glance? That sounds like a great feature request. So yeah, that sounds like a really cool idea. Go ahead and submit that as a new feature request, and I'm sure other schools may want to chime in on what they would want to see in something like that. All right, here's another question. How do you handle reporting campaign effectiveness over time if you're updating the rule to change the start terms each year, or doesn't that matter? Great question. So this is something that you want to sort of think about, and this applies to a lot of things in Slate. Slate is your active transactional database. It's not necessarily a data warehouse. And so if we're thinking about the sort of idea of a sophomore population and a junior population, this year's sophomores are next year's juniors. And so the population informs the active messages that they should be receiving. So if you want to sort of query on the effectiveness of that, you just sort of have to isolate the data points that were appropriate at the time the message was sent. So for example, that people who got the junior campaign this year are applicants next year. So, those are all the same people. You don't need to query on the fact that they were in the junior population last year, because specifically using population as your filter, they're no longer a junior as a population when they're seniors. So you would want to filter on who they are by looking at people who were juniors last year in your query. So that listening to myself say that probably sounds a little bit complicated, but it's this idea of populations represent sort of the current state of the student, and it informs the messages that they're going to receive in this cycle or while they fit the criteria for that population. If you want to set up a reporting structure to sort of measure that, you're building the rules. What criteria you're using to set that population, and so you could certainly set up some queries referencing that. You may also want to take some steps to sort of additionally track messages that were sent to students based on who they were. So there's a lot of different data points you could get at to do that, but essentially this idea of you can query based on the criteria that you use to set the population to begin with would allow you to identify who those people were. All right. Next question. Can you send out drip messages according to specific ping activity? Sure. So you can definitely filter on a lot of different ping related items. So let's go ahead and take a look at our ping filters here. Again, you can look at Slate allows you to filter based on the following criteria: ping by URL, ping count by timestamp, ping count by URL and timestamp, duration URL. So, for example, if you wanted to look at people who had, visited a certain, certain page multiple times between a certain date range, or looking at the URL between a certain date range, you could certainly have those messages go out to students based on this criteria. But again, like all things using ping, you might want to take some care around messaging that, just to ensure that you're not sort of showing your hand too much, that you are, have as much information about the students as you do. Again, there's some best practices that your institution may want to take around that. All right, another question. Before populations were created, we set this process up using inquiry campaigns. How would you recommend switching over from using the campaign rules and starting to use populations instead? So there's definitely been ways to sort of do this in the past. We have field timestamp filters and campaign interval filters, specifically looking at field values that were set at a specific time. Because populations gives you a little bit more functionality, we definitely recommend, investigating this as an opportunity to change your process if you want to do that. Like all things in Slate, we definitely recommend testing it out first. Maybe building some take some test approaches to ensure that your results are what you've been getting and what you expect to be getting, and then ultimately you just sort of need to choose a date that you sort of switch everything over for students going forward, taking the time to do a catch-up mailing for those people that were supposed to get something else based on a different data point, until you've sort of migrated completely over to your new way of doing things for the new population. So if you have specific questions about that, and I can imagine that it will be a little more nuanced based on your process, don't hesitate to open a request in the Deliver group or student record group, and we'd be happy to help you out there. One thing to note there for viewer 291, you definitely want to create new mailings. So new mailings is the key here. You definitely don't want to sort of take your old mailings and change the queries and change the content and send them to new people. It's a really great idea to sort of stop the old mailings once you've gotten the new mailing set up. So you sort of do a totally fresh transition to new mailings with new queries. Obviously, you can copy the content over so the HTML might look the same, but it's definitely a great idea to do new mailings for that, so that you're not sort of mucking anything up in your sort of existing process. All right, so we are over time here. It's about 2:04, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time today. So we'll go ahead and wrap things up now. This webinar has been recorded, so we're going to put this on Slate TV later on this week, so you can look for it there and share with your colleagues if they weren't able to join us today. And definitely don't hesitate to let us know any specific questions you might have about your process via the service desk, student record group, or the Deliver group specifically if you're looking at emails. But we're definitely excited about this population functionality and hope that it will be useful and helpful to you all in your process. So all right, everyone, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great Wednesday afternoon. Bye-bye.